Hi, I'm Christy. I want to talk to you today more about sensory issues and what they are. I should preface this by saying I'm not a medical professional. This is not meant to diagnose or treat. It is for informational purposes only. Many people might think this is something new, and really it's not. It's just that in the past few decades it has gotten more awareness and more attention, and so it is now being addressed by the medical community. Officially, it's had a bunch of names over the years. I've heard it called sensory processing disorder and sensory integration disorder in my personal experience. In my research, I've also discovered that it's been called sensory integration dysfunction, or SI dysfunction. It's also been called the dysfunction of sensory integration, or DSI. It appears that the sensory processing disorder, or SPD, is the newest and currently preferred term. WebMD.com describes it this way. Sensory processing disorder is a condition in which the brain has trouble receiving and responding to information that comes in through the senses. Dana at Lemon Lime Adventures says sensory processing is the brain's ability to process information from all of the senses, not just the typical 5 senses you think of, and connect it to information with what we already know about the world around us. I like those definitions because they're pretty simple, they're pretty basic, and they're in plain English so you can understand them. A little bit more technical, SPDstar.com says sensory processing refers to the way the nervous system receives messages from the senses and turns them into responses. For those with sensory processing disorder, sensory information goes into the brain, but it does not get organized into appropriate responses. That article goes on to say that it's a neurological disorder in which the sensory information that the individual perceives results in abnormal responses. All of this goes into a formal diagnosis that can come when multiple functioning areas are impacted into everyday life. So all of these show us that it is definitely a neurological processing issue. That means how the brain processes the information is where the issue is. The brain does not process the information coming in what we would consider a normal way, and therefore the responses that come out are not normal. Pioneering OT, or occupational therapist, psychologist, and neuroscientist Jean Ayres likened SPD to a neurological traffic jam that prevents certain parts of the brain from receiving the information needed to interpret sensory information correctly. Now, today, SPD is not an official medical diagnosis, but there are many medical professionals who believe that it should be, and they're working on this, and they're trying to get enough medical studies and research done to do that. The problem is that it's really difficult to perform a controlled scientific study because of a number of different issues. For one, there's the difficulty of isolating a single issue or a single factor and being able to study it exclusively in a medical study. Another issue is that many times there are multiple diagnoses going on, and so it's hard to distinguish what's this diagnosis from sensory from whatever else. Another issue is that SPD is a cluster of symptoms along a really big spectrum. And so it's hard to be able to include all ends of the spectrum or the whole spectrum while still isolating one issue to deal with. Another issue is that responses can vary greatly from person to person, and even within the same person from day to day, and sometimes even moment to moment. And so all of these things go into making it really difficult to scientifically study SPD. But the research is being done, and the goal is to prove that it is a real neurological condition and then get it included in the DSM-5, which is the main diagnosis manual for the medical profession. As I mentioned before, part of the issue is that you can swing from one end of the pendulum to the other on this spectrum. You can have those that are overly sensitive to input and can scream at loud noises and overreact to them. Or they might overreact to the slightest touch and act like you're killing them or causing them lots of pain. Or you can have, on the other end, people who don't respond to pain at all. Or they may not respond to excessive heat or cold, and they can become injured from that. So both of these, we've got to be able to teach them how to process the information that they're given and then respond with an appropriate response. The cause of SPD has not been officially identified. There is some research that says it may be a genetic link sometimes. There's other research that says there is a causal relationship between prenatal and birth complications. Sometimes it might be environmental circumstances. BrightTots.com says that factors that contribute to sensory integration or sensory processing disorder include premature birth, autism and other developmental disorders, learning disabilities, delinquency and substance abuse due to learning disabilities, and stress-related disorders, as well as brain injury. So I hope that this has given you a little bit better understanding on what SPD is. And as you understand it, and as you begin to grasp how broad it can be, I hope that you can join me in saying that life is good, and there is never a dull moment.